Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending. This is the Financial, Administrative, and Procurement Subcommittee meeting scheduled for March 12, 2025 at 1 p.m. This is for AVA Community Energy Board. And we are welcoming everyone who is in the room as well as online. Would you take roll call, please?
Yes, I can. Director Murata. Director Murata.
Maybe he's on mute.
No worries, we'll come back. Director Kang. Got it.
Here.
Perfect. Director Kang's here. Director Del Cantacio.
Present.
Director Brown. Present. Director Sakakera.
Here.
And Chair Court.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Wonderful. Are there any public comments?
There are no members of the public with their hand raised at the moment.
In that case, we'll go to item 3, which is approval of the minutes from September 11, 2024. It is an action item. Are there any public comments on this agenda item?
There are no members of the public with their hand raised.
All right. Anyone have any questions about the minutes from September 11, 2024? I may be the only director who was there for that meeting. Or actually, we can go ahead. Has everyone had a chance to review those minutes? All right, I'm just going to move approval of the minutes from September 11, 2024. Is there a second?
I would typically abstain from minutes that I wasn't at, but it sounds like we're going to have an issue with number of votes if we do that. So I'll go ahead and second. And I did review them, so I feel comfortable with seconding, and also in the vote, I will be voting in favor as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Scott. Motion by Kaur and seconded by Scott Sakakera. Please correct me if I'm mispronouncing. All in favor?
All right, I will take the...
yes, please do take the roll call.
All right. Dublin.
Aye.
Fremont.
Aye.
Newark.
Aye.
Oakland. Aye. Union City.
Aye.
And Emeryville.
Aye.
Thank you. The minutes are approved.
All right, proceeding to agenda item number 4, the FAP annual agenda informational item, a presentation on known upcoming agenda items.
Hi, hello, this is Jason Bartlett, Senior Finance Manager at AVA Community Energy. I am going to keep my camera off. I apologize. Where I'm at has limited bandwidth, and if it's on, I get really choppy and no one can hear me. And I think, you know, what I say is more important than how I look at this point. So thank you for your understanding. So Raisa, if you could load the item, please, for screen share, that would be great.
Yes, please give me a second as we're facing some technical difficulties yet again. All right.
Raisa, I have just a question for you before we go forward with the presentation. You said you needed to swear in Member Kang?
Yes, could we please swear in Member Kang right now, please? Thank you. All right, Member Kang, please repeat after me. I, Teresa Kang,
I, Teresa Kang,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear truth and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California.
that I take this obligation freely,
Oh, sorry, can you repeat that?
that I take this obligation freely
That I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion.
and that I will well and faithfully
That I will well and faithfully
discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
discharge. Oh, sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes, discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Now I'll be moving on to the next item, if it will allow me to screen share.
Welcome, Member King. And so are we proceeding with the presentation now, Raisa?
Yes, it seems like we're having some computer issues here, but I will do my best to share soon. All right. I think we're now ready. Yep.
Great. Thank you, Reza. And thank you to see all the ladies and gentlemen of this subcommittee. I appreciate your time. So this is the Finance, Administrative, and Procurement schedule that we're going to be talking about, the upcoming items that we have identified for through this calendar year, and the times in which we're expecting to bring them for your review. Excuse me. So 5 meetings are scheduled for this calendar year. All the meetings are currently scheduled at this time slot on every other second Wednesday, every other month, on the second Wednesday. These events may be adjusted as I believe we're still trying to coordinate with all the members here as to what time and availability would work best for them. But we will proceed with the more general schedule, which is today, March 12th. Our next one is May 14th. The one after that is scheduled on July 9th, and then September 10th, and then November 12th. If we could go to the next slide, please, Risa. So these are the items that we are expected to bring on these future dates. So the May 14th, we're expected to bring for your review a draft of the next year's fiscal budget. For those of you that are new, our budget process is that approval is expected at the board in June. And so this is really the only FAP meeting, and it gets us kind of early before the May board for that review. So it's kind of a crucial item that will be brought. We will also be bringing forth any recommendations for funding the reserve and the rate stabilization funds, as well as any possible policy adjustments. And we do have an item later in this committee meeting that goes more in depth into our reserve funding and rate stabilization policies. So you'll get a really good preview of that today. The next item is discussions in regard to our credit facility. It is scheduled to renew in October. We currently hold a credit facility with US Bank. We are entering that 3-year kind of renewal mark. And so we will bring further discussion and enlightenment on to what this process will involve. And then also scheduled for the next meeting is a review of our prepay, our next prepay issuance, which will go for board approval in May. We're expecting there may be some room there, but this will be our 4th prepay, and there'll be a kind of deeper dive on what that looks like. July 9th will be a further discussion of expectations and any possible related cofactors regarding to our credit facility discussion. So this will be an ongoing continued item, at least through September, as we're expected to bring it to the board for approval in September. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So there we have top of the list, review of our credit facility as we get negotiated terms that will be brought to you. And then we will also be issuing a progress report on the financial audit. We go through an annual financial audit between the close of the fiscal year, which is June 30th. So July 1, it starts, and we try to bring it to the board for the November board meeting. So we will be bringing the expected presentation of the annual audited financial statements in the November meeting for you to review prior to presentation to the board. And at that time, there will be a couple of other items that are budget related. There will be for the current fiscal year that we're in, once that audit is complete, we will know what our net budget revenues are that we could apply to our waterfall allocation. And we'll go more in depth into that, into how that waterfall involves reserve funding. And I believe this year it also has some on-bill credits that get issued back to the community, as well as some solar and storage incentives for our local development programs. And then finally, there will also be a presentation on the reserve and rate stabilization fund levels and targets based upon that waterfall allocation. So I think we could go to the next slide. And yeah, that's it. Sorry, there's the template. We don't need that. But if we could go back to the previous slide, please, Risa.
Yeah.
So yes, there we are. So that kind of completes the expected items that and approximate schedule that we'll be bringing to the Finance, Administrative, and Procurement Committee this calendar year. And with that, are there any questions, comments, or concerns?
Thank you, Jason. I think we should probably go for public comment first. Is there any public comment, Raisa?
There are no members of the public with their hand raised at this time.
Thank you. Yes, any questions? Please, any question, comment, or discussion on the presentation from any members? Seeing and hearing none, I am going to move on to the next item. However, before I do that, Raisa, I think we should appoint or elect the vice president to preside in case, or the vice chair in case I'm not available to preside. I don't see it listed on the agenda item, but I think there was an email that was sent out that said that at this meeting we would be electing one.
Vice Chair, Chair Core, I believe I also sent out an email saying that I received recommendation from Howard, the CEO, not to elect a vice chair at this moment. But Howard, do you have anything to add to that I'm missing?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I guess two things I would highlight, and sorry that I'm in transit from a speaking event, so just dial in. But I had asked to pull that from this for two reasons. One is historically we haven't had a vice chair for our FAP and our MRL subcommittees. There's no restriction that we can't have one. So by all means, we can do that. But in this case, because we haven't agendized it properly for this meeting, I don't believe that we can move forward with that action, at least today. And the other reason why I explicitly didn't want it today is just because we have quite a number of new members that are just for the first time sitting in their FAP meeting. So I thought it may not be the best time for somebody to get elected as the vice chair, since there's not maybe enough familiarity with the FAP and the meetings and such. So perhaps I could talk with you offline, since it's not agendized here, and just determine the right time to agendize that, and if we do indeed want to have a vice chair.
Thank you, Howard, for clarifying that. Yes, I think that would be good. Maybe we can have that discussion online, and then if it's not on the agenda, obviously we should not vote on it or put it on there. Maybe we could do it as a future agenda item at the end of the meeting, if necessary. After my discussion with you, of course, offline.
Okay,
thank you.
That makes sense
Thank
to
you
me.
so much. Okay. In that case, we can proceed to agenda item number 5, which is the financial year 24 and 25 Q2 financial statements. This is an informational item. Please present.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Raisa. Yeah, if you could please scroll up one more. Okay. So every quarter we receive draft financial statements from our accountant. This is a introductory letter. We use Maher Accountancy as our external accounting firm. We've selected them a couple of times through different RFP processes. They do have substantial experience in the CCA space, which makes them an excellent kind of accounting partner. If we could see the next slide, please. So this is the statement of net position. It's relevantly similar to a balance sheet if you were in the private world, but in the public world, it's a statement of net position. The key areas here to which I would draw your attention, of course, feel free to peruse at your leisure, but is that in the non-current assets in this statement, we have investments of 286 million. We have started using a treasury management firm that has taken essentially our reserve fund and have put it into various forms of investment as aligned with our board-approved investment policy. This investment policy, I believe, was approved in May, and we have just started getting the investments in place in November and December. And so this is just ending as of December 31st. And so I wanted to just kind of draw your attention to that line item as it is new on these statements. Then if we could go down to the next sheet, please. So this is the statement of revenue, expenses, and changes in net position, very similar to an income statement. And so we have here presented two different data columns. One is for the quarter and one is the fiscal year to date. So that is from July 1 of 2024 through December 31st. So a full 6 operating months. The kind of couple of important takeaways here is that down below on non-operating revenues and expenses, we do see that in those 3 months we had a large $4 million of investment income relative to the year to date. So we seem to be keeping on track with what we would expect. I'm just highlighting this because I would preface that the next quarter might be significantly larger, given that we have more invested, as I have previously pointed out, from this quarter. And so then the next kind of key important item on this is the change in net position. It is positive of about 25 million, and that is a sign of our kind of healthy operational structure. And then the following pages after this are statements of cash flow, which are difficult to interpret at best, but gives a more detailed accounting of how our cash was applied during the previous 3 months. And of course, also the other column there is for the full fiscal year. So I'm hoping you've had a chance to review, and at that point, I'm ready for comment and questions.
Thank you so much, Jason. Any public comments, Raisa?
There are no members of the public with their hand raised at this time.
Any questions, comments on this informational item from the members?
I have one.
Yes, please go ahead, Dublin.
Okay. Thank you, Director Carr. Jason, I have a question about during one of the prior board meetings, there was a line item for uncollectibles, and where is that represented in our financials, and has it increased or decreased in the past 3 months?
That's a good question. Thank you. That's a complicated question because it's in a couple of places, because we have an accounting treatment that it's not necessarily entirely under accounts accrued revenue and accounts receivable as where the predominance of it is, but there is some on the let's see what the other accrued liabilities. It's very minor. These are potentially identified recent write-off items that have not yet been written off, and so that's where I believe that balancing is occurring. And so to answer the second part of your question, has it gone up or gone down? It generally ticks up at about the rate that we've been tracking it, which is around 1% on average. And that's kind of the longer term uncollectibles. The shorter term uncollectibles is going down. And what's that indicating to us is that people are paying their bills sooner than they have been in the first 3 months of our fiscal year. Why that is not entirely clear to us at this time, but it's still within kind of the normal expected range that we would see from, first month late bills.
All right, I think I understand. We don't have to get into the particulars at the moment. We can discuss that later. But I do have a follow-up question.
Yes.
Which is from a strategic perspective, what sort of ideas do we have, forethought plans, whatever you want to call it, around the macroeconomic situation that we might be facing with particular headwinds, and how would that, of course, either increase or decrease our collectibles, but generally, how would that possibly impact our revenue as well?
Yeah, very good. So the short answer is that this will be a conversation that is had during the budget development process when we come, and I will be, of course, working closely with Rusty and Howard into getting a good estimate of that, also with our accountant who, as I said, does have experience with other CCAs and is tracking this metric across the broader industry. And so those will be helpful when coming to the discussion.
Let
in
me,
terms of, yeah,
Jason,
by all
let me
means.
just chime in with a couple additional thoughts there. I see Rusty, you also maybe have something to add as well. I'll just share that historically, we've tracked on a fairly stable and steady level in terms of our uncollectibles in that sort of 0.5% to 1% range. That's been a fairly consistent and comfortable number with not a lot of variation. With that said, in the COVID shelter-in-place timeframe, when you see a recessionary type of activity happen, or environment start to happen, I should say, we did increase that to, I believe it was 2%, if not 2.5%. We'll have to validate that, but we did increase it. It was still obviously a modest number, but that was a multiple or more above what our steady state was. And so I think as you look forward and think about potential recessionary environments, which I know there's certainly discussion of that right now, given tariffs and other impacts that could increase the risk of that, I think we would certainly look to increase our uncollectibles, depending on what is driving that and what sectors may be more impacted. So I think there's a little bit more analysis to be done here, given the circumstances. In the shelter-in-place circumstances with COVID, obviously that was unique in and of itself. So it's not to say that this would mirror that, but there could be information to learn there. And I'm sure Rusty, given his experience at SMUD and other load-serving entities, can probably speak to other examples that would be suitable.
Yeah, I think that anytime you get the early signs that you're entering a soft spot, it's probably time to at least evaluate and see if there are any changes that might be warranted. I think also adding the customer base that we have this year with some more to follow, it might be worth getting some experience with that customer base as well as part of the evaluation. We don't know how Stockton, Lathrop, San Joaquin Valley might have uncollectibles that are different from the Bay Area. I mean, I think there's certainly potential for that. But I think as Howard said, I think we want to be mindful that, we've tracked fairly close to the budgeted and expectations that we've had in our operations for the past couple of years. So I think just a little more analysis is probably needed before we make any recommendations on changing that.
Okay, fair point. Thank you, everybody. No further questions, Director Carr.
Thank you, Director Murata. Raisa, I think I can just see the person speaking. I need to move my screen, but if I miss someone who is trying to be recognized, please alert me. You may be able to see the screen better than I do.
I will.
Thank you so much. And we can proceed. If there are no further questions, we'll proceed to item 6 on the agenda, which is the Reserve Fund Review. It's an informational item. And I believe there's a presentation of this one as well.
Great. I'll present on this, but we'll certainly welcome thoughts from both Rusty and Jason as we do that. All right. So what we wanted to cover here today on this topic is we've had a few discussion points amongst the board just about our reserve policy. You know, what does a 50% target with a 25 to 75% range really mean? How do we enact this policy with a little bit more clarity on how we'll fund it over the years? And some of that conversation's sparked just by interest in thinking about how do we increase our discount and address some of the affordability issues. So we wanted to present an informational item here with FAP to first, baseline our new members to understand what our policy says. We've done some benchmarking across various agencies and load serving entities to understand kind of what our reserve policy looks like relative to other entities of a similar nature. And then want to talk a little bit about our a potential future funding plan. So we have a little bit more planning and clarity as to what that looks like in the coming years to give our board, more direction on what that looks like as it relates to rate setting and value proposition setting and such. So that's the background, and we will present this to the full board in next week's meeting as well. So this is a preview for our FAP for discussion. Okay, with that said, this first slide is just a little bit about the history. So we initially adopted a reserve policy in June of 2018. In that first version, we actually had 4 different buckets of reserves: credit reserve, a rate credit reserve, a collateral reserve, a local development reserve. It was a little bit overly complicated, thoughtful, but overly complicated. And through discussion with our credit rating agency and other CCAs, we actually simplified it and collapsed it all into a single credit reserve. And we made that amendment in January of 2021 to simplify that. And we also did that because we were separately developing a local development fund. It's not a reserve per se, but it is a separate fund that accumulates the various budgetary dollars that we put towards local development activities. So they're managed sort of separately, and there's good visibility and transparency in terms of what's happening there in terms of the local development fund. And as an aside, we presented on the local development fund reconciliation in the XCOM, and we'll present that to our March full board as well. The reserve policy itself does have a 50%. The target is 50% of operating expenses with a range of 25 to 75%. Next slide, Raisa. Thank you. Here, what we did is just show the list of different agencies that we surveyed. Obviously, the list is long. The list could be longer. There's many agencies out there with a variety of different types of reserve policies. What we tried to capture is the lion's share of larger CCAs. We also tried to capture other municipal utilities or publicly owned utilities, such as LADWP, SMUD. Those are load serving entities of similar-ish size to us. LADWP certainly being quite a bit larger, SMUD being probably modestly larger, but of similar-ish size. And then we also included some local Alameda County agencies, such as AC Transit, EB, MUD, just to make sure we capture that in the research and analysis as well. It was a fairly broad survey. What we were looking at is target levels, utilization details, as well as how are you funding it in terms of top line versus bottom line, et cetera. And so that's the survey process. Next slide, Raisa. Thank you. So here is just kind of a quick summary of the results of that. And I'll just start by saying that we were generally in line with the norms of these agencies that we surveyed. The agencies certainly had some variability amongst the reserve targets, as you can imagine, but for the most part, they looked pretty similar. What the percentages that were captured here is we're just trying to summarize what they had in terms of their target, min, and max levels. And so for their target levels, 22 of them have a target level, and that average is 48%. And what that means is very few of them don't have a target identified. Only one of those entities didn't actually have a target identified. So certainly in the norm that you have one identified, and that generally norm is right around 50%. It was 48% numerically. In terms of a minimum level, roughly half of the entities we surveyed, so 12 of the 23 entities had a minimum level identified. That average percentage for that minimum level was 29%. Ours is 25%. So again, fairly close and in line. 11 of the entities did not have a minimum reserve target identified. On the max level, similar-ish results. 10 of the 23, so a little less than half, 43% of the entities that we surveyed had a max reserve target of around 73%, ours being 75%. So again, pretty closely aligned. More than half of the half funded the reserves from net revenues. 2 of them funded from gross revenues, and the rest did not specify funding mechanisms. So whether it came from, say, a net position or a top line versus a bottom line was not totally clear or identified in those reserve policies. And then in terms of utilization, what they noted was 10 of them allowed CEO discretion for use of reserves. 8 of them required board approval, and 5 did not specify. And for clarity, our policy requires board approval to utilize the reserves. Next slide, Raisa. And maybe I'll just pause there too and just ask it, Rusty, I don't know if you have any additional comments, obviously with you coming from a variety of other load serving entities, and Jason, you having done pretty extensive research here, anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, just real quick on, I came from SMUD, obviously. We included them in the analysis. Different type of operation, lots of assets owned by SMUD, but still had 150 days cash burn as the minimum level before seeking capital funding, but typically carried around 180 to 220 on average throughout the year of days cash on hand. So that equates roughly, close to that 6 months of operating expenditures, if you want to look at it from the analysis that Ava has. But I also worked for DWR prior, and we had an operating reserve that was stress tested annually. 6 months of power and operating costs were resized each year, but again, in line with that 6 months that Ava already carries. So as Howard was showing on the statistically, we're pretty close to right in line to where lots of different organizations are. And there's lots of great reasons why to carry reserves. I think Howard will get into those in a couple of slides, and we can talk a little more about that. But Jason, anything to add?
No, that's pretty comprehensive from both of you.
Great. Thank you for those comments. Let me jump back into the slide. So slide 5 here, we just have shown sort of what our current reserve fund levels are and the anticipated upcoming needs. So and you've probably seen this table. I think we presented it once or twice recently as well. We will commonly bring this up just to make sure there's good visibility on our reserve levels are, since it has such scrutiny and focus just from a credit risk perspective. So our current allocated reserves are just shy of $331 million. That covers approximately 40% of our current fiscal year's operating expenses. And we anticipate adding upwards of $65 million or so. You can see that in the table in the bottom from this fiscal year. Now that will only occur after the year wraps up, which is ending June 30th. We'll go through a full audit process, and really in the fall timeframe, typically in November, is when we would be able to finalize those numbers, because we'll have audited financials to determine, all right, what will be the allocation towards reserves based off the approved sort of budget and surplus waterfall that we already discussed. So If that all goes forward as is outlined here in this table, we will reach close to $400 million in that balance. Now, the thing I want to note there is when you look at the operating expenses for the 24-25 year, it's just shy of $1.1 billion. That is looking at operating expenses for the forward year, and that captures a portion of serving San Joaquin County. And so one thing that's important to keep in mind as we are expanding, we're adding load, we are adding to our annual operating expenditures, of course. And so the rough estimate for what we think a full year of serving Stockton, Lathrop, and unincorporated San Joaquin County, it will be about $1.2 billion. So even though we're actually continuing to add materially to our reserve balance, our annual operating expenses are also increasing fairly materially. So we're actually seeing our percent coverage come down a little bit. It's still at a healthy level, but we're not hitting that 50% target level, and we're receding a bit. So we're projecting that to be about 37%, actually coming down from where our current percent coverage is. So I think that's a really important factor just to point out. And then the last thing I'll just say is, why do we have this wide range of 25 to 75%? I think that's fairly practical. We've seen that's in line with the benchmarking and the industry norms from other similar types of entities. But just to explain that a little bit is you want to have that wide range, both because we're a young agency, so we're obviously building our way up. So we're within that healthy range, if you will. But you also want to have that wide range in a scenario where you're actually utilizing or potentially utilizing those reserves. Because if you do have an off year, some major capital expenditure due to a project issue or something like that, you may elect to release some reserves. And obviously in that instance, you wouldn't want to bump yourself out of that healthy range. You want to give yourself some ability to actually utilize that reserve. So that's one. And then the other is our annual operating expenditures also can fluctuate itself. We've seen quite a bit of volatility in the energy markets across the board with different types of energy products. So resource adequacy, renewable energy certificates, as well as brown power. So there's a variety of drivers that impact volatility year to year in terms of annual operating expenditures. And so, to the extent prices spiked in a given year, you'd want to be able to maintain a healthy percent coverage in that scenario. So those are some reasons why you do want to have generally a wider range. Next slide, Raisa. Great. So one of the things we wanted to just start to discuss this with this subcommittee is the idea of a funding plan. Obviously we want to be able to hit our target reserves, as I just noted, as we are expanding and growing in our operating expenditures. We're receding a little bit, but still at a healthy level, but it will take us some more time to obviously hit that target level. As I briefly noted before, a fully loaded year serving our current members for a full year currently is estimated at about $1.2 billion. Now, that number can certainly change in a number of years based off of where energy costs are, but currently that's estimated at about $1.2 billion. So 50% reserve target in that scenario would be $600 million. We're anticipating at the end of this fiscal year being around $400 million. So we're about $200 million shy based off of those figures. And so there's a question in front of us to say, what does a funding plan look like in order to meet our target levels? Would we want to target hitting that level in 5 years, in 10 years, something in between, 7, 8 years? That's all open for discussion. So our staff, we're going to run some further analysis to stress test that annual operating expenditures number and think about where that may be in 5 to 10 years time frame, given inflation, load increases. We're not going to assume expansion in that analysis, although we may stress test that with some ideas around expansion. But ultimately, I think we want to create a funding plan based off of our current members and know that we'll, of course, adapt our funding plan if we do, in fact, decide to expand further in the future. So the base case will be no expansion, and we'll run some numbers just about what that target number will need to be. And then we'll run a variety of scenarios and likely bring a recommendation forward on, what where do we want to generally target in terms of number of years to hit that? So this is one of the areas we were hoping to get some feedback from the board, just to get a sense of, is there a general interest to hit those target levels on the earlier end or on the later end? And obviously hitting it on the earlier end means we are putting more towards reserves each year in the short term. And that means, lesser ability to increase our discount or our value proposition, because we're going to put more towards reserves. So that's the trade-off. And obviously, the longer you go, the less, the less you have to allocate year to year, which means you can utilize that funding elsewhere, whether that be to lower rates or programs or whatnot. But obviously, then you're carrying a little bit more operating risk because you're not hitting your reserve levels for a longer period of time. So those are the factors that we want to consider. Obviously, in a 5-year funding plan, we have to allocate around $50-ish million a year. In a 10-year funding plan, it's closer to $25 million a year. So those are sort of the ballpark numbers. And certainly we could do something different from the 5 to 10-year target. We could do something more accelerated and target, 3 to 5 year time frame, and that would be even more there, of course. So that's a concept we want to put out there. More analysis will be done most likely in the April and May timeframe. We'll likely want to bring that just ahead of the budget setting process, because what you want to allocate reserves can have a significant impact on how you set your value proposition and how you budget for other types of programs and funding needs. So that's what's on the horizon, and this is initiating that discussion. Next slide, Raisa. So a little bit more just on utilization, so we can provide a little bit more color on that, on how we want to use it. The policy itself is fairly high level when it comes to utilization. We're really using it for more catastrophic events. It's not intended to be used for sort of day-to-day operations. Of course, we have ample working capital and a credit facility to help manage some of those things. But really, the objectives are to maintain long-term financial independence and rate stability. It's to secure favorable commercial terms with vendors and power providers. Obviously, anytime we do any meaningful energy transactions, there's a whole counterparty credit evaluation that we do on our counterparty, and our counterparty does on us. Being a single A-rated entity by S&P carries a lot of weight, but obviously each credit department will do their own evaluation looking at our liquidity and ability to manage risk. So the more we have in reserves, the more cash we have on hand, generally the more favorable counterparty credit terms that we have with our long-term PPA providers, and as well as our short-term energy hedge counterparties. We want to provide liquidity for unanticipated expenditures, of course. So it's not just there for credit evaluation, but it's there truly for credit protection. So if we have any huge price spikes, if we owned assets in the future and had some major capital expenditure due to a project outage or something of that nature, we want to have those that liquidity and reserve there to meet those needs. And then, of course, any other strategic objectives, having that cash available for any significant investments in capital if we deem that we wanted to go own projects or transmission or anything else that is potential out there. We're not at that stage of doing that, of course. I've talked about the concept of owning assets with our board. There's still a lot of an evaluation analysis that we want to do before we would commit to doing that. But of course, having ample reserves to be able to make those investments, as well as to weather the risk of holding such assets and infrastructure on our balance sheet, would be really important. The way I'll sort of speak to it colloquially is I think of our reserve policy as that sort of earthquake fund. It's that hopefully 1 in 50 years, hopefully never, it's really for a really, really, really bad catastrophe. And so I equate it to sort of that earthquake fund of, you don't really want to plan to use it, but you need it to be there in case there is something catastrophic that occurs. Next slide. Last point on this is we are also anticipating a potential for a rate stabilization fund. We do have a GASB 62 fund, which is akin to a rate stabilization fund today, but it's this is an additional fund and a policy that we do want to refine more and talk a little bit more about what a broader rate stabilization fund would look like. Currently, what we do is we use that fund to put in some of our budget surplus into it. And for example, for our on-bill credits, because they're different fiscal periods where we have that surplus and when we issue this credit, we actually put it into a revenue deferral fund. So we align the timing. So, when we issued, $20 million in on-bill credits not that long ago, we put it into a rate stabilization GASB 62 fund. And then the next fiscal year, when we actually provided the on-bill credit for the customers, that's when we actually released it from the GASB 62 account. So we have certain mechanisms like that we utilize the fund for, but we don't have a more generalized policy for, would you want to use it once in 10 years, twice in 20 years, because there's a down cycle, and in order to maintain your value proposition, you are using it. So I think I anticipate that we'll want to develop some guidelines and utilization around that. So that's on the horizon. And I just wanted to flag that these are different items related to liquidity and risk management. There's your reserve policy, which is I equated that earthquake fund. And then there's the rate stabilization fund. And that's more of, you want to do a kitchen remodel and you want to have that money available there once in 20 years, once in 10 years to do something like that. It's not exactly a cash rock of event. It's smaller dollars, hopefully. And there's an expectation for, more readily using something like that. The last point I'll make here is there's a waterfall of liquidity resources. The first, of course, is our working capital. We have ample cash on our balance sheet. Historically, we've done an allocation of our budget surplus into cash. We believe we have ample cash at this stage. So this last fiscal year, we did not do an allocation to working capital. And I don't necessarily anticipate that we will need to put more there, but want to flag, obviously, that's a discussion that we'll have as it relates to the next budget cycle. So that's kind of your first line of liquidity defense. You have your rate stabilization fund, as I just noted, that needs to be further refined and honed, but that is a fund that we have at our disposal to be able to use once in 10 or 20 years as needed. We have our credit facility. We have a $200 million credit facility. We use that for various credit posting requirements, and it is also there for ample liquidity to ensure if there is a down cycle or some type of volatility in the market, that we have excess liquidity to manage that risk. And then the last thing, of course, is that reserve fund. And that's the fund we really hope to not use. And it's really for, unique and extreme circumstances. Next slide, Raisa. Is that it? Okay. Last slide is just sort of concluding in next steps. So we would like to get a little bit of feedback here from the board in terms of what the information we provided here, specifically in terms of the funding plan and the time frame there. If there's any direction that the board would like to provide, we'll provide this as an informational item to the full board next week. And we anticipate probably in the May timeframe, we'll bring forward some more information here with a little bit more robust analysis, as well as a recommendation on a funding plan. And then probably following that, we may also have some anticipated items related to a rate stabilization fund policy. Okay, that is it on this item. Happy to take questions and comments.
Thank you, Howard. I see that Director Murata, you have your hand raised. Before I recognize you, I think I should ask for public comment or see if there's any public that wants to comment on this item.
There are no members of the public with their hand raised.
All right. Since there are none, Director Murata, you're recognized to ask your question or questions.
Yes, thank you, Director Kaur. More comment than a question, and my comment is not representative of a vote or particular debate, but I just wanted to comment to Executive Chang and Executive Mills that the way I'm looking at the data, which, by the way, let me start with the fact that at 40% reserve, that's fantastic. I applaud you for getting us there. But I also do think getting to 50%, given where we are currently, it's a bit of a stretch. And I'm in capital markets too, so I think given particular headwinds we can all think about, it'd be tough to do something like that within less than 5 years. So, and I know you're going to do a base case with no expansion, which is also fair. I think that's a great analysis to do. But again, I still think it's going to probably be more like a 7-year case in which we should probably forecast a 50% attainment. and we could go into details later or some other point, but that's just kind of my comment and my thinking, which is anything short of 5 at the moment is to be tough, because at some point we're cutting thin to the bone, and what we don't want to do is reduce our services or the quality of service to our members, and that would be just my general comment, which is let's maintain a high quality in order for them to want to stay with us. Right? That's all. That's my only comment.
Thank you so much, Director Murata. You're recognized, Director Sakakihara.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Howard, for the presentation, and the report beforehand was super helpful as well. I think my input at this stage and similar comments to Commissioner Murata in terms of, happy to see how it develops. So this is not any final by any means, but I think in the past you've kind of shown, I know here you showed the sort of liquidity waterfall, but on the other side of things, we've had that surplus waterfall, I think, in the past, where it's here's what we fund, first, second, third, if we have the surplus. And so I think what I would lean towards is something like, first, it's a little bit of a hybrid of the options you'd put on one of those slides. Is first, what would it look like? And again, this is assuming a world with a surplus and not a deficit, but what would it look like to first maintain the prior year's value proposition, then fund the reserves a set amount tied to 5 years or 7 years, like Commissioner Murata mentioned, whatever that number may be that we decide on, then after consider options if there's any remainder at that point, right? Whether further adjustments to the value proposition, further contributions to reserves, or additional funding for other priorities. So that's pretty close to the second and third options that you had on those 3 options, except that I know one of the downsides of those 2 you listed was that it could put the value proposition at risk, and I'm kind of putting that up in the waterfall above funding the reserve of what would it look like if first we maintained, in this case, if it was this year, it'd be the 5%, right? And then go from there.
Thank you so much, Director Sakakihara. Any other comments?
Chair Core, we have Director Brown in the room who has a comment to make.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, the room appears very small on screen. Please go ahead, Director Brown. Please ask our comment.
Okay, sounds good. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I am able to hear you, Howard. Are you able to
Yes.
hear Director Brown? Yes,
Yes.
we are all able to hear you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the presentation. Definitely super comprehensive. And as I am just trying to really get up to speed with everything, I did have a question around, can you share out some examples of either unique or extreme circumstances where we would have to kind of tap into this reserve fund?
Sure. One example is a little less tangible right now, but in the instance where we actually own assets on our balance sheet and you had some large, let's just say a large solar and battery storage project that was a multi-$100 million asset that you put on balance sheet and it came offline for some reason. So you were anticipating in your portfolio delivering power and it came out there was some type of technical issue and it was out for a month doing repairs and you needed a transformer to be replaced, which is a long lead time item. And so 1 month led to 2 months, 3 months. And so it was out for 3 months. And so you would want to have additional capital on your balance sheet to be able to release because you had anticipated you would have some type of generating resource or a hedge in your portfolio that was no longer operational. So that would be one example. Another example could be simply energy market spikes. And we have seen that over the last several years, various energy products such as resource adequacy or renewable energy specifically, spiking costs where it's multiples above where it's been historical, 2, 3, 4, 5 times greater than where it's been. And so that's just this unexpected increase of costs that obviously not our whole portfolio would expose to that because we have a lot of energy hedges, but we do manage our portfolio intentionally in a way where we have some exposure to the market so that if prices come down, we are able to take advantage of that. But that also means there's risk if prices go up. So if you have 10 or 20% of your portfolio that's exposed to that risk, that's another example where you could suddenly have initial $50 million of expenditures. Now, we can obviously manage some of that risk without the reserve policy because we can alter our rates and alter our value proposition to manage that risk as well. So it's not as if it all rests on the reserve policy, but it's another tool to help manage that, of course.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that clarity. And so kind of on that note, in, especially as we're looking at, really like the breakdown of like, okay, well, if we do this thing, you know, prioritize it versus 5 years versus 10 years. I guess I am curious, kind of looking at like some of the concerns that we all have relative to the federal government and how so much like, I think so much weight of responsibility will really kind of be put on our state, like on at the state level, and how that trickles down, like kind of county and at the local level. I guess I'm curious how we can present ourselves to be like supportive of, like, are you looking at it that way? I guess like kind of seeing how kind of at the federal level there's just a lot of angst around like the various support that local states will receive and how that trickles down. And so just curious if that is coming into play as we're looking at some of these timeframes.
I think it certainly does. I think the way I think about some of the uncertainty that is in play right now, caused by the federal administration, is just that there's a lot of unknowns, whether that be changes to tariffs that could impact some of our procurement costs, changes to some of the renewable incentives, whether it's the ITC, PTC, or other types of incentives. And there's also further unknowns of things that may not be a direct impact to Ava, but rather an impact to Californians, California businesses, California renewable energy development, where our resource selection will change as a result of some of these impacts. And some of the funding sources for community organizations and consultants and vendors that we work with could be impacted, and therefore we need to go seek different partners for a variety of reasons. So there's a lot of uncertainty and risk there to point to, and it's hard to say, of course, what will happen. And I think this reserve plan is not being proposed or discussed here directly because of that uncertainty, but I think that type of uncertainty and risk is certainly a great example of, you have things that you can plan for, and you have some unknown unknowns there that you want to have liquidity and cash to be able to allow an agency like ours to weather through it without any issues. And so I think the reserve policy is a great reflection of, when you put that capital aside into reserve fund, you're saving it for a really, really, really bad time. And hopefully that really bad time is not on the horizon here, but there's a lot of uncertainty there. And so you could elect not to put it in your reserve policy because you want to hold it as cash, because you want to use it more flexibly. And you want to put it you don't want to put it in your retirement savings, so to speak. You want to put it in your bank and hold it and know that it's there over the next several years. Or you could say, we want to put it in reserves. We want to be really disciplined about putting it away. And in a bad situation, you can use those reserves. You want to really be hesitant to do that, but you can. That's what it's there for, and it's the board's action that will allow for that. And it forces some discipline around putting it away, and making sure we have it, as opposed to, say, lowering your rates, increasing your discount to PG&E, because customers are also struggling from an affordability standpoint. So there's different trade-offs. So that funding can go to reserves. It can go to working capital, so it's more on hand to manage risk. It can go into lowering costs for our customers immediately. It can go into funding programs, because we're seeing the environmental ecosystem, or the sustainability energy ecosystem around Alameda County and California is struggling because of the loss of incentives. So we need to try to offset some of that, and we want to put that towards local programs. So there is a wide variety of areas that you could put that funding. And I think that will be a discussion point with the board, with the budget, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Any other questions from any other directors? Any comments?
And if I could, I just want to make sure, Rusty, if you had any other thoughts there, I was quick to answer them, but just wanted to make sure if you had additional thoughts you wanted to share, you had an opportunity.
Yeah, maybe the only quick one would be just on ratings, maintaining them, and development if we are looking down the road at asset ownership. Maintaining those reserves are going to be important to ratings. And of course, ratings also affect our operations, contracting, right? Lower collateral costs for better ratings, things like that. So anyway, I think I think Howard, you covered a lot of different scenarios, and you just wanted to throw that in. So.
Thank you, Rusty. Any other questions, any comments from directors? Okay, all right. As far as feedback from me, I like what you have said, Rusty. I like the fact that we need to preserve our ratings. And so without compromising the ratings, I think if we could go with something like a 7 or a happy medium, I think that would be a 7-year plan. That would be much better. I echo the comments that this Ava Community Energy has done a great job, and I think that's largely because of all the finance and procurement initiatives that have been taken on this particular committee and as part of this finance and procurement team. Thank you for doing a great job. And again, I think a happy medium would be a good one. We would not be sacrificing our value propositions and at the same time maintaining our rating. So with that, I can proceed to the next item on agenda. It is Accounts Receivable Recovery Agency informational item. It's going to be providing a feedback on agency selection to implement the accounts receivable recovery policy. Presentation, please.
Hey folks, my name is Chris Davis and I'm the Customer Operations Manager. And today I'm seeking feedback from the board on a proposal to contract an accounts receivable recovery agent. Next slide, please. Staff is recommending that we move forward with contracting with Sacramento Municipal Utility District in partnership with IC Systems for an account receivable recovery services. The proposed contract will run through December 2026 with a performance review scheduled at the 12-month mark. This recommendation aligns with AVA's current relationship with SMUD, and by partnering with SMUD and ICS, we can ensure that we have streamlined, cost-effective process and recovering outstanding balances while maintaining strong customer service. Next slide, please. So I'll give you a little bit of the background. Currently, AVA has accumulated 20 million in uncollected billings. Every year, approximately 5 million of that local becomes eligible for recovery and the debt reaches 61 days or more past due. And also the accounts have to be closed before we can start collecting on them. These overdue accounts involve more than 300,000 customers. And of that total debt, 59% comes from the residential customers. AVA first adopted its accounts receivable recovery policy in 2018, but its implementation was paused in 2020 due to the emergency customer protections introduced by COVID-19 pandemic. The state's COVID-19 state of emergency officially ended on February 28, 2023, allowing us to resume implementation of our collections policy. About a year later, AVA adopted an accounts receivable recovery policy in March of 2024. So to move forward with this policy, staff issued a request for proposals in September of 2024, and we were seeking vendors to handle our debt collection services. Next slide, please. If a customer's account is closed with a past due balance, once the debt is 61 days or older, it enters AVA's recovery process. And at this time, AVA will begin collections in accordance with our established recovery process outlined in our policy. AVA's policy allows AVA to collect on past due balances that have been reversed in PG&E. And on the next slide, we'll review PG&E's process. Next slide, please. So this is a high-level summary of PG&E's delinquency process for both residential and non-residential accounts. During this process, PG&E will offer the customer a payment plan which can stop the disconnection process as long as the balance is paid as agreed. Well, as shown here, after day 95 or day 87, if the account is disconnected, overdue debt is transferred to AVA where we can begin the recovery process according to our policies. And not all debt comes from disconnected accounts. So for example, a customer could have a payment plan to pay off their balance and they voluntarily close their account and leave the final bill unpaid. Next slide, please. We'll go ahead and talk a little bit about our RFP process. In September 2024, Ava issued an RFP for debt collection services, and 3 agencies responded to that RFP. And just want to note that none of the agencies were local to our service territory. Proposals were evaluated by a team, and the top 2 agencies were selected for interviews. And the top 2 vendors were SMUD and Harris & Harris. So those were the 2 that we moved forward with interviewing. Next slide. And I just want to go over some key differences between SMUD and Harris & Harris. So SMUD has a 24/7 inbound IVR system where the customer can get information regarding their debt. SMUD also provides manual skip tracing, which is a process of locating a debtor who has moved or become uncontactable, and they follow up with persistent communications even after 90 days. A part of SMUD's unique communication includes a here to help letter, where they give customers valuable information about the programs that may help them lower their bills and also prevent collections entirely. Some of the programs include CARE, FARA, Medical Baseline, and also payment plans. So SMUD currently provides the same service to Valley Clean Energy, and Valley staff reports that they and their customers are satisfied with the work that's being completed. And additionally, SMUD offers a lower recovery fee compared to Harris & Harris. Next slide, please. So to the review, AVA sees about 5 million in uncollectibles on average each year, with 60% coming from residential customers. Staff estimates a recovery rate of 10% or about 40,000 in accounts receivable recoveries per month. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, staff is recommending that we move forward with contracting with SMUD in partnership with ICS for accounts receivable recovery services. Some determining factors were lower primary recovery fee of 10%, ICS's prior integration with SMUD, and also favorable customer feedback. And the proposed contract will run through the duration of the current contract that we have with SMUD, which concludes in December of 2026. And we'd also like to do a performance review scheduled at the 12-month mark of this contract. Next slide. I think that might be it.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any public comments on item 7?
There are no public comments at this time.
All right, in that case, directors, are there any questions, comments? I recognize Director Murata. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Power. Hi, Chris. Good to meet you. Quick question. I noted on the very last slide that we'll do a assess or a review with them after 12 months. May I recommend that we have something done more frequently than that, where we're assessing SLAs and key performance metrics so we know if things are on the right track or if we're behaving towards the appropriate contractual agreements and clauses.
Thank you, Director Murata, for the comment. Is there any response to that, Howard or Chris? To that recommendation? Any foreseeable issues with doing that?
Yeah,
I'll say on my end, I see the practicality of doing a look back sooner to make sure things are on track. Interested to know from Chris and team if you feel if there's any operational reason or contractual reason that we find that would be more difficult.
No, I feel like that's a fair ask, and I think that's something that we can accommodate. Kelly, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. I think that certainly we would be reviewing in particular those SLAs that Director Murata mentioned. And those reports are generally updated for us on a monthly basis. So we would see if there's any issues with with those rolling averages. And yes, 12 months is sort of a natural break, but we would be looking at the numbers in the meantime as well.
Wonderful.
One clarifying question from me, Director Murata, is it your interest that we present to the FAP a look back sooner, or is it more just your interest in making sure staff is looking at it and ensuring that things are going smoothly?
Not necessarily a readout to the FAP, Executive Chang. Just want to make sure that I read contracts a lot, and sometimes just having a clause in that states we will be doing formal reviews quarterly or semi-annually, it just puts people on notice that performance is something that we hold near and dear to our heart, and that we don't let things slide. That's all.
Got it. Okay, thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense. Appreciate that.
Wonderful, great suggestion. Thank you, Director Murata. You recognize Director Sakakihara.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions, and they're all kind of about, I think they probably stem mostly from my just being new to the operations around these collections. So the first is for these 300,000 customers, that's residential and non-residential combined, that are part of the sort of backlog. Is that to say that since the accounts have to be closed before they become eligible, these are all folks that have either moved, or in the case of the businesses, they may have closed up shop and that's why their accounts are closed, but they're not currently receiving energy. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. For one reason or another, some of that you may have mentioned, their accounts are closed and they no longer have services with AVA.
Got it. And for that backlog of $20 million, I think I understand, it was a very informative staff report. Thank you. It makes sense, the operations that we're planning to do on sort of an ongoing basis, but are they also signing up to help us with that 20 million off the bat for no addition? I saw the flat fees, something like $5,000, right? Plus 10%. It's still that even in the beginning when they're dealing with this $20 million backlog?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, got it. And then just the language on the slide and in the staff report as well, the aging accounts are eligible to return to PG&E for continued non-payment. Can you explain that to me?
They're eligible to return to AVA for non-payment. That means that if once they become 61 days or more past due, PG&E can remove them from having service, disconnect them, and then the charges will come back to AVA, and we will be able to collect on them at that point.
Okay,
Is that what
that
you were
makes sense to
asking?
me.
Did
I
that
thought
answer your
that it
question?
said, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. I think it said to PG&E. That's why I was confused by, let me see if I can find it. I don't know if we have the slide available, but if it was meant to be AVA, that makes sense.
Do you
Let's
have
see
the
if I can-
slide, Raisa? You can put it up if you have the slide.
It
You
might
were-
have been in the staff report. Let me see.
We have the slide up, but I'm currently trying to find that exact number. It could be also on the staff report, as member Sakakira had just mentioned.
Oh yeah, it's slide 4, I think.
Yes.
And then while we're, oh, perfect.
I
So it's
can
that
speak to
middle,
that.
yeah.
So it is the recovery policy itself. This is AVA's recovery policy. Hi, this is Kelly Buzzbeck, Senior Director of Account Services. AVA does have the ability, not that we have exercised that ability. We can, should a customer continue to not pay, we can send a customer back to PG&E, meaning we can change it so that they are receiving generation services from PG&E.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. And then the last question was just, and sorry, this is from the staff report, but there was a line that said SMUD would be involved in both the data integration and ongoing administrative work. Therefore, the fees described earlier in this memo apply to both agencies. Could you explain, like, what fees apply and what are the two agencies, SMUD and AVA?
The two agencies referred to were SMUD and our other option that was Harris and Harris. And that actually would
okay.
be applied to any other agencies that we considered. Those fees of the $100,000 startup and the $5,000 monthly, those fees would apply to any agency that we picked. It's just
Got
the
it. That
work that
makes a lot
SMUD
more
has to
sense.
do to get us ready to start collecting.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you. That was
You're
it for me.
welcome.
Any other questions from any other directors? Any comments? Any feedback? So this will be presented to the board, AVA board at large, for the voting on it, or is it something that you will present another time? Or it's not going to be a voting item?
It's going to be a board item. Kelly, did you want to expand on that?
Sure, yes, we do intend to bring this to the board later, I guess that's next week, right?
On the
Yes.
19th.
So we'll bring this to the board for adoption next week.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, were there any public, there were no public comments, correct?
Yes, there were no public comments.
Great, so we can move forward. If there are no further questions from any other directors, no comments or feedback, we can move forward to item 8, unclaimed funds policy. This is also an informational item to provide feedback on a policy to manage unclaimed funds.
Okay, Ryson, go ahead and slip to the next slide. Thanks so much. So staff is requesting feedback on the draft unclaimed funds policy, which addresses the process of handling funds that AVA owes to customers but have not yet been claimed. These funds are typically due to uncashed checks. Next slide, please. As of August 2024, AVA's total liability for unclaimed funds stands at about $2 million, owed to about 7,000 customers. Implementing the unclaimed funds policy will help reduce AVA's liability by clearing unclaimed funds from our balance sheet, ensuring more accurate financial reporting. While funds expire and return to AVA's budget, the process is expected to have minimal fiscal impact on our overall operations, as the unclaimed funds are small relative to AVA's total operating income and expenses. Under California's unclaimed property law, entities are required to report unclaimed funds to the state controller after 3 years of inactivity. However, there are exemptions to this law, and AVA falls under the exemption listed on this slide, which allows AVA to move the funds to our general fund after 36 months. Next slide, please. AVA follows the current process that we have listed here to send payments to customers. Most of the time, AVA is sending a check to a customer. It is for a net energy metering or NEM true-up payment, either to an active or closed customer account, and staff takes the following steps. So AVA will issue a check to the mailing address on file, including information about the check expiring date and how to contact AVA if they have questions. After 90 days, the check becomes stale and void, and the customer may contact AVA to request a new check. The customer must confirm their mailing address, and then AVA will send a new check that will expire 90 days after it's being mailed. Next slide. So AVA will like to continue with the process outlined on the previous slide. And then in addition to, AVA will compile a list of customers who have unclaimed funds and list them on our website. After the website is updated, AVA will also attempt to contact the customer after 36 months. Funds are transferred back to AVA's general fund, and the funds are removed from AVA's liability. The customer will then be removed from the unclaimed funds list that is listed on our website. With the proposed updates, customers will be able to easily find and claim unclaimed funds. By listing the unclaimed funds on our website and notifying customers via email, we're providing clear visibility and helping customers take actions more efficiently. The updates will also reduce AVA's administrative burden by establishing clearer guidelines for managing unclaimed funds, and this will make the process more efficient for both AVA and our customers. The policy also aligns with California's unclaimed funds policy law, particularly the first 36-month requirement. This ensures that AVA's approach is consistent with state law, which customers may already be familiar with, making the process easier to understand. Next slide. So in conclusion, staff is requesting feedback in order to finalize our policy. The proposed updates to the unclaimed funds policy will help reduce AVA's liability, while also improving the customer's experience by providing better visibility and streamlined process for claiming unclaimed funds. And I believe that's it.
Thank you, Chris. Any public comments on item 8 to provide feedback on a policy to manage unclaimed funds?
There are no members of the public with their hand raised at this time.
With that, I will recognize Director Sakakihara for your questions, comments, or feedback on item 8?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just one question, which is definitely want to do as much as we can to give the customers a chance to claim these funds before we pull them back. So I like all the proposals around that. My only question was the posting on the website. Is that something that's common practice in this situation? I was just curious because it seems like there would be potential fraud concerns, but if there's a way that it's done by other agencies that is proven, then I'm fine with that.
And we did analyze how some of the other CCAs and local utilities were listing their funds online, and we are considering mirroring some of the efforts that are already out and working, and also implementing some of our own. And we have not finalized the full strategy of how to get things listed on our website. So that's still in development.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sakihara. Any other questions? Do the members in the room have any questions? Okay. Any feedback on unclaimed funds policy? Okay.
We have a hand raised in the room right now.
Director Brown,
Yeah. So
please
just
go
quick-
ahead.
Just quick question, is it not, well, I'm not seeing in the policy that they receive a phone call? Is that just kind of outside of the like scope of capacity to do that?
Yes, they will not be receiving a phone call. I think currently we have approximately almost 7,000 customers that have unclaimed funds. So it's not sustainable to do phone calls, but we are going to do emails moving forward.
And so that's the new addition, which is the
Correct.
email
Yes. We'll be reaching out by email.
versus presently it's just like a letter in the mail.
Presently, the only communication they have is when we send them the original check. And they would have to contact us and inquire about if they have unclaimed funds after that. There's no further communication from us at this time.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Director Brown. Any feedback on this policy from the directors? Okay. All right, so I'm fine with the policy that you have instituted and presented, Chris. Is this going to be an action item at some point for the board?
Kelly, were we going to take this to the board?
Yes, we will be bringing this to the board as an action item. If not in March, it will be at a future board meeting, pending some of the operations concerns that Chris identified earlier.
Great, thank you. Has the executive committee heard this item yet, or is this something that will also go before the executive committee? It may be well worth it for them to know about this item.
No, this has not been to the executive committee yet.
Okay.
I anticipate that this would be the body that would provide feedback, and then it would go to the full board.
Okay, all right, thank you so much. And then we are moving on to any committee member or staff announcements, including requests to place items on future board agendas. All right, seeing and hearing none, we can adjourn this meeting. It is now 2:25 p.m. and the next meeting is going to be held at 1999 Harrison Street, Suite 2300, Oakland, California, 94612 is the zip, and it's going to be on May 14th, 2025 at 1 p.m. Please mark your calendars so that we can have a quorum. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.